The private dining room at Hongfu restaurant, the Glory Hall, the largest they had, was air-conditioned to the point of being chilly. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, and the enormous peony painting on the wall was a donation from Aunt Lily 2 years prior, supposedly a $6,800 purchase from a renowned artist. Cheng had known the moment he laid eyes on it that it was a cheap print, but he'd never said a word. He stepped through the doorway and found 7 or 8 relatives already there. Uncle Frank sat next to the head of the table, picking his teeth with a toothpick at a leisurely pace. Uncle Sam nursed a cup of tea, his eyes glued to the television on the wall, which was broadcasting news about the city's new commercial complex bidding. Several cousins had their heads down over their phones, occasionally leaning in to whisper to one another. How's here? Aunt Lily was the first to spot him, her voice a little too warm, a little too bright. Come, sit down. We were just waiting for you. Ethan nodded slightly and chose a seat near the door. It was the farthest spot from the head of the table, but it gave him easy access to the exit, an escape route he'd developed the habit of keeping open without even thinking about it. His aunt was 48, impeccably maintained, with a face almost entirely free of wrinkles. The silk dress she wore was this spring's newest collection, and the string of South Sea pearls around her neck was, according to her, worth a small fortune. She'd married well. Her husband, James Lee, had made his fortune in construction materials and was now a name in local business circles. That was why Aunt Lily spoke with such unshakable authority in the family. She never had to lower her voice, because everyone listened when she spoke. Where's Marcus? Ethan asked, referring to her 15-year-old son. Tutoring class. Your uncle will pick him up later. She looked him up and down as she spoke. How, I'm not trying to be critical, but this is a family gathering. You couldn't have worn something a little more formal. Ethan glanced down at his clean white t-shirt and dark jeans. It's comfortable. Comfortable is one thing. Formal is another. She wrinkled her nose and shook her head. If your father were still here, he'd have something to say about that too. Your father was always about appearances. At the mention of his father, Ethan's fingers tightened involuntarily. 3 years ago, when he'd returned from Beijing, the family's attitude had been entirely different. The day his father was diagnosed, Ethan had received the news over the phone and dropped his coffee cup on the spot. He bought a plane ticket that same day, quit his job, and flew back overnight. By the time he landed, it was 3 a.m. He'd stood in the hospital corridor with his suitcase, staring through the window at his father, who was already asleep in the bed, so thin he was barely a shape beneath the sheets. He sat in that corridor all night. At dawn, he called every relative. Uncle Frank said he'd come right away. Uncle Sam said the same. Aunt Lily said, How, don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Uncle Frank arrived first. He held his brother's hand for hours, eyes red all day. He helped Ethan find the best doctors, stood in line to pay the fees himself, and brought hot meals every day. Ethan still remembered that the thermos Uncle Frank carried was always warm. Uncle Sam came next. He was a man of few words, but he'd sit by his brother's bedside for hours, saying almost nothing, and leave a plain white envelope on the table before he went. The amounts varied, sometimes $50, sometimes $100, but it never stopped. Aunt Lily was the last to show up. She arrived in new clothes, with a fresh haircut, carrying 2 cartons of milk and a bouquet of flowers. She stood at the hospital room door for a moment, took a photo of herself in the doorway, and only then stepped inside. She posted the photo with the caption, "Company is the truest form of love." It got over a dozen likes. She stayed 20 minutes. Before she left, she said, How, don't worry about the money. I'll get you 50,000 first. Ethan had almost cried with gratitude. He thanked her, and she patted his hand and said, We're family. What's there to thank? That 50,000 didn't arrive for 2 months. In between, Ethan called to ask twice. The first time, she said the bank transfer was slow. The second time, she said, I told James to send it, didn't he? He didn't call a third time. By the time the money came, his father's first round of chemo was already over. Ethan learned later, from Uncle James himself, that the money had come out of his own pocket. Aunt Lily had called him and said, "Send How 50,000, put it on my tab." James transferred it, and Aunt Lily went straight to the family group chat and announced, "I gave How 50,000. Ethan never mentioned it. But he made a note. The night his father passed, Ethan sat in the corridor outside the morgue until sunrise. His aunt arrived the next morning in tears, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, gripping his hand and saying, How, you still have me." He believed her then. For a moment, he even thought he'd misjudged her. The real turning point came 3 days after the funeral. He was sorting through his father's belongings in the old house when he found an envelope tucked into a drawer of his father's writing desk. Inside were several sheets of paper, handwritten, a letter his father had never sent. It was addressed to him. How, I know you've been wronged. I'm not blind to what your aunt has done over the years. But I don't want you to bow your head to her, and I don't want you to tear the family apart. The only thing I can give you is this house, so you'll always have somewhere to fall back on. Remember this, How, no matter how far she goes, she's still your aunt. Bear it if you can. But if you truly can't bear it anymore, then don't. I'll be watching from above. The last line was written in a shaky, uneven script. His father's hand must have been trembling badly by then. It said, How, I'm sorry. I couldn't take care of you the way I should have. Ethan read that letter over and over. Eventually, he folded it carefully and placed it under the glass top of his father's desk. Every time he returned to the old house, it was there, waiting. Bear it if you can. But if you can't bear it anymore, then don't. Ethan held on for 3 years. Not because he was afraid of his aunt, but because he wanted to preserve the dignity his father had cherished his whole life. His father had always dreaded family scandals, always feared what outsiders would think of the Chengs. But his aunt kept peeling back the layers. That 50,000 was my gift. You should be grateful, How. Let me manage the old house for you. Why should you get to keep it all to yourself? Layer by layer, the mask came off. Ethan understood it later, the night she called him an ungrateful wretch. The reason it felt so exhausting was because the dignity he'd guarded for 3 years had just been smashed to pieces by the very person he'd been protecting it from. And once it was broken, there was no point in protecting it anymore. That night, he went home, opened his laptop, and created a new folder. He named it, In Case. From that day on, he started collecting evidence. Not out of premeditation, but out of instinct. He needed to know what cards he held. His father had been gone 3 years now. Lung cancer, late stage. 8 months from diagnosis to the end. During those 8 months, Ethan had quit his job in Beijing and come home to care for him, spending every penny of his savings on treatment. And his aunt, who'd promised so earnestly she'd be there, had visited the hospital exactly 3 times. Never more than half an hour each visit. And every single time, she'd taken photos for her social media, with the same caption, "Company is the truest form of love." Ethan had screenshots of all 3 posts. Lily, let the young people dress how they like, Uncle Frank said, trying to smooth things over. How looks just fine. Aunt Lily pursed her lips, said nothing more, and turned to hurry the waiters along. The relatives trickled in one by one. The round table seated 15, and soon it was full. Ethan scanned the room, Uncle Frank's family of 4, Uncle Sam's family of 3, Aunt Lily's family of 3, though Uncle James and Marcus hadn't arrived yet, 2 distant cousins, and himself. His father's branch of the family had dwindled to 1. James Lee arrived last, with Marcus in tow. He was in his early 50s, still in decent shape, but his temples had gone gray and there was a weariness in his brow that never quite lifted. He caught Ethan's eye and nodded once, without a word. Marcus was in his 3rd year of middle school, tall and thin, with black-rimmed glasses and a shy manner. He slid into the seat next to Ethan and murmured, "Hey, cuz. How's school going?" Ethan asked. All right. Marcus pushed his glasses up. Physics is killing me, though. I can't keep up. If you need help with anything, just ask. Marcus's eyes lit up. Really? You're a Tsinghua grad. Ethan smiled. He'd graduated from Tsinghua's computer science department, once the pride of the family. But he'd chosen to work at a mid-sized tech firm in Beijing, doing research and development, rather than following his aunt's advice to take the civil service exam or join his uncle's company. That choice had dimmed his luster in the family's eyes. The dishes arrived, and Uncle Frank, as the eldest son, raised his glass. It's rare we get the whole family together like this. Let's raise a toast, to the Cheng family's prosperity. Everyone lifted their glasses. Ethan took a sip of the red wine, and the sourness spread across his tongue. He didn't actually like red wine, but at these gatherings, the choice was always his aunt's, and nobody ever asked for his opinion. After a few rounds of drinks, the atmosphere loosened. Uncle Frank talked about his son's civil service exam, Uncle Sam mentioned his daughter's acceptance to an Ivy League school, Aunt Lily steered the conversation toward her own business. James just landed a huge project, the new commercial complex downtown. We're supplying a third of the building materials. She raised her voice a notch. Just this one deal, net profit, she made a gesture with her hand. Aunt May gasped. 200,000. 200,000. Aunt Lily let out a dismissive laugh. Add a zero to that. The table erupted in admiration. James Lee waved his hand. It's not finalized yet. Don't count your chickens. How is it not finalized? The contract's practically signed. Aunt Lily shot her husband a look, then turned back to the table. You see, business is all about seizing opportunities. Back then, I told How he should join James's company, but he insisted on going to Beijing to do computer stuff. And now look. She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning landed. Several relatives shot Ethan looks that said, see? You should have listened. Ethan calmly took a bite of fish. That company in Beijing hadn't been big, but he'd led 2 major projects there. Last year, it had been acquired by a public company, and his equity payout, well, it wasn't less than the number Aunt Lily had just thrown around. He just kept it to himself. Nobody in the family knew. Ethan remembered clearly, in the days right after his father died, Aunt Lily had been a different person. At the funeral, after everyone else had left, she'd pulled him aside in the corridor outside the morning hall, taken his hand, and said, How, your father's gone now. If you ever need anything, you come to me. Work, money, don't carry it all by yourself. There were real tears in her eyes that day. For a moment, Ethan had been moved. But that night, back at his father's old house, he'd been sorting through the belongings when he opened his father's phone. The old man's hands had been so shaky in his final months that he'd asked Ethan to save his WeChat password, and found messages his aunt had sent. One from a month before his father died, that Ethan had never seen before. Brother, have you thought about the old house? How is still young. He doesn't know how to manage property. Why not transfer it to me? I'll take care of it for him, and when he needs the money later, I can give it to him. Don't worry, I wouldn't cheat my own nephew. His father had never replied. Ethan sat there in his father's study, the phone screen casting pale light across his face, staring at that message for a long, long time. His father was gone. He would never be able to reply. And his aunt, to his face, was always the doting relative saying, whatever you need, how, just tell me. From that day on, Ethan's eyes had been different when he looked at her. But he never said anything. His father had always said, in family matters, endure when you can, yield when you must. He endured for 3 years. Until tonight. The conversation drifted back to the children. Uncle Frank's daughter-in-law was pregnant. Uncle Sam's daughter had gotten her Ivy League acceptance. Naturally, Aunt Lily had to chime in about Marcus. Marcus scored 12th in his grade on midterms. His teacher says if he keeps it up, he's a lock for a top high school. Marcus is such a smart boy. Takes after Lily, Aunt May said, buttering her up. Takes after James too, Aunt Lily said, putting a piece of food on her husband's plate. James was a university student back in the day. If he hadn't gone into business, he'd probably be a professor by now. James Lee smiled, but it was a tight, forced smile. Ethan noticed that his uncle had barely touched his food all night. He was drinking steadily, the baijiu, a half bottle already gone. Another round of toasts passed, and then Aunt Lily stood up abruptly. She held her glass, but the warm, maternal smile she'd been wearing all night had vanished, replaced by a tightly drawn expression, the face of someone who'd rehearsed every word. Since everyone's here, there's something I need to talk about. She swept her gaze around the table, finally landing on Ethan. It's about the old house. The one my brother, Hao-Hao's father, left behind. Ethan's chopstick stopped midair. So this was what the dinner was really about. The room fell silent. So silent that even the waiter sensed the shift in atmosphere and slipped out. Before Dad died, he left the old house to Hao-Hao, Uncle Frank said cautiously. We all know that. I know. Aunt Lily set down her wine glass and planted both palms on the table. But Dad was already confused by then. He didn't know what he was doing when he wrote that will. And traditionally, property should be split among the sons. Hao-Hao is just a grandson. Why should he get the whole thing? Ethan set down his own chopsticks. The old house had belonged to his grandfather, a 70-square-meter unit from the 1980s, in the old part of the city, worth maybe $100,000 on the current market. His father had been the youngest son, and his grandfather had left the house to him. His father had left it to Ethan. I was there when Grandpa wrote his will, Ethan said evenly. The lawyer was there. The doctor was there. They did a mental evaluation and confirmed Grandpa was fully lucid. Your father arranged all of that. Aunt Lily's voice went shrill. Everyone knows your father knew how to work the system. He already took an extra property when they split the inheritance, and now he wants the old house all to himself. That was too much. Uncle Frank's face darkened. Lily, watch your words. Our brother is gone now. Does being gone erase what he did? Aunt Lily's eyes reddened, sudden and theatrical. I'm saying this in front of the whole family, right now. Hao-Hao, you're going to give that house back, and we 3 siblings are going to divide it fairly. Uncle Sam cleared his throat. Lily, it's not like the house is worth that much. It's not about the money, she snapped. It's about fairness. It's about what's right. Why should Ethan get everything Grandpa left? All eyes turned to Ethan. Some sympathetic. Some curious. Some just waiting for the show. Ethan looked up and met her gaze directly. Aunt Lily, what do you want the house for? She blinked. What do I want it for? It's Cheng family property. The Cheng family should decide what to do with it. Specifically, what would you do with it? Ethan pressed. Sell it and split the proceeds. Or do you have something else in mind? She faltered for a moment, then her face twisted in annoyance. What I do with it is none of your business. The point is, you can't just keep it all. Uncle James tugged at her sleeve. Lily, sit down. Let's talk about this calmly. How can I be calm? She yanked her arm away. James, you don't understand. This kid is an ungrateful wretch. Didn't we help when his father was sick? I gave him $50,000 out of my own pocket. And this is how he repays me. He won't even listen to his elders. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered that $50,000 exactly. His aunt had arrived at the hospital with a bulging envelope, but she'd said, consider this a loan. You can pay me back later. 1 round of chemo cost $2,000. A full course was 6 rounds. $50,000 didn't even cover 1 round. I paid that money back last year, Ethan said evenly. With interest, $6,000. I transferred it to your account. Didn't you check? Aunt Lily's face flickered. She clearly hadn't noticed the transfer, or had noticed and chosen to ignore it. Money is one thing, but what about gratitude? She shot back. When your father was hospitalized, I called in favors, I found specialists, I ran around for you. I even had people import medicine from abroad. Can you put a price on that? Ethan remembered those specialists very well. One was a relative of her mahjong partner, a cardiologist who had nothing to do with oncology. And the imported medicine had been generic Indian drugs. He'd learned later that his aunt had marked up the price considerably. But he said nothing. His father had taught him that some things were best left unsaid. Regarding the house, the legal situation is clear, Ethan said, keeping his voice level. Grandpa's will is valid. Dad's will is valid. If you have a problem with that, you can take it to court. You. Her finger trembled as she pointed at him. So that's it, how? You're going to sue your own family. Your father's been dead 3 years, and you're already fighting over the inheritance. Lily, that's enough, Uncle James said, getting to his feet. This is a family dinner, not a courtroom. A family dinner? She laughed bitterly. It's exactly because this is a family dinner that I'm saying this now. Ethan, I'm going to ask you one last time, are you going to give up that house or not? The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even Marcus had put down his chopsticks, looking anxiously between his mother and his cousin. Ethan looked at his aunt's contorted face, at the silent relatives around the table, at Uncle James's helpless expression. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, the kind that seeps into your bones. 3 years of this. His father's death. His career upended. Grieving alone. And at every family gathering, he had to face another demand, another accusation. No, Ethan said. 2 syllables. Clear. Unwavering. Aunt Lily's temper detonated. She snatched up her wine glass, not to drink, but to point it at him like a weapon. Ethan. You ungrateful bastard. Your father wasted his love on you. The Cheng family wasted its breath on you. Red wine sloshed over the rim and splashed across the white tablecloth, pooling like blood. The dinner broke up in chaos. Uncle Frank and Uncle Sam's families left first, leaving Ethan, Aunt Lily's family, and 2 distant uncles who seemed to have something to say but ultimately said nothing. Aunt Lily was still fuming, pulling at her husband to leave. Uncle James waved her off. You go ahead. I need a word with Ethan. What's there to talk about with him? She snapped. Just a few words. His voice was uncharacteristically firm. She stared at him for a long moment, then let out a sharp huff, grabbed Marcus, and stalked out. Marcus glanced back over his shoulder as he left, his expression was confused, and there was something else too. Fear, maybe. Or worry. Now it was just Ethan and Uncle James, surrounded by the debris of a ruined meal. A waiter started to come in, but James waved him away. We'll be a while. Give us a minute. The door clicked shut. James pulled out a cigarette and lit it. Ethan remembered that his uncle had quit smoking years ago. Don't take what she said to heart, how. He exhaled a plume of smoke. She's hot-tempered, but her heart's in the right place. Ethan said nothing. About the old house. James weighed his words. If your aunt really pushes this, I'll try to talk her down. To be honest, she doesn't even really want it. Then what does she want? James was quiet for a moment. She wants to tear it down and rebuild. The land's in a good location. She thinks she can put up a small apartment building and make a killing. She's already got a developer friend lined up. So that was it. Not about splitting property, about development. Ethan almost laughed. Tear down a 70-square-meter house in the old city. Even ignoring the zoning regulations, the sheer impossibility of coordinating with a dozen neighbors made it a pipe dream. It's not going to happen, Ethan said. There are strict rules about redevelopment in the old city. And the neighbors won't all agree. I know. James gave a bitter smile. But your aunt won't hear it. She's convinced that if she wants something badly enough, she can make it happen. Ethan studied the man across from him. He looked so much older than the uncle he remembered, the lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders more stooped. He thought back to his childhood, when Uncle James used to take him fishing, patiently teaching him how to tie a hook and read the bobber. In those days, his uncle had been full of life, his laughter booming and easy. "Uncle, how have you been feeling lately?" Ethan asked. James blinked. Fine, fine. Just the usual stomach trouble. Go easy on the drinking." Ethan paused. "And don't carry everything on your shoulders. Some things aren't your responsibility, and you don't have to bear them alone." Something in his tone made James look up sharply. How, is there something you're not telling me?" Ethan didn't answer directly. "I knew a guy in Beijing who worked as a private investigator. Sometimes he'd tell me about interesting cases." A piece of ash fell from James's cigarette. "There's one case I remember really well," Ethan continued. "A businessman hired him to look into his wife, because he suspected she was having an affair. Turns out she was. The affair was with his driver. And the son he'd raised for 10 years, the driver's." The room went deathly still. The cigarette trembled in James's hand. "What happened to the businessman?" James's voice was dry. "He paid the driver off and made him disappear. Divorced his wife. The son." Ethan paused. "He never said what happened with the boy. But I imagine, having to look at that child every day, it must have been painful." James stubbed out his cigarette violently, knocking over his teacup in the process. Tea spread across the tablecloth, dripping onto the carpet. How? His voice was shaking. "It's just a story," Ethan said, rising. "Take care of yourself, Uncle. I'll be going." At the door, James called after him. "When did you find out?" Ethan turned. His uncle's face was ashen, as though he'd just been told he had a terminal illness. 3 years ago, when Dad was sick. You got drunk one night and talked to him in the hospital corridor. I came out to take a call and heard." James's eyes closed. He collapsed back into his chair. The fragments of that conversation replayed in Ethan's mind, his uncle's sobs, his father's murmured reassurances, and that one line that had burned itself into his memory, "Marcus looks more and more like him." Ethan hadn't wanted to believe it at first. But afterward, he started paying closer attention, and he noticed that Marcus's features didn't really resemble James's, or Aunt Lily's, for that matter. But old Cheng, James's driver, Ethan had seen him a few times. That straight nose, that slight upturn at the corner of the mouth when he smiled, it was a perfect match. "Why didn't you say anything?" James asked, his eyes still closed. "Why would I?" Ethan said. "It's your business. And Marcus is innocent." James opened his eyes, and the look he gave Ethan was complicated. "Then why did you say it today?" "Because Aunt Lily called me an ungrateful wretch," Ethan said flatly. "She said the Cheng family wasted its breath on me. But at least I never spent the Cheng family's money raising someone else's child for 15 years. The words landed like a blade. James clutched his chest, overcome by a coughing fit. Ethan hesitated, then walked back, filled a glass with water, and pushed it toward him. "Uncle, I'm not threatening you." He met James's eyes. "I just want her to back off. The old house is the last thing I have of my father, and I won't let anyone take it. If she pushes me again." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. James took a sip of water, his hands still shaking. "I'll talk to her." How, what happened today, can we keep it?" "As long as Aunt Lily doesn't come after me anymore, I won't say a word," Ethan promised. "Marcus will always be my cousin. That won't change." James let out a long, exhausted sigh, but Ethan wasn't going to just sit back and do nothing. He'd learned over the past 3 years that people like his aunt didn't stop unless you made them stop. If all he did was hope she'd back off, she'd only push harder. So over the previous 6 months, Ethan had already taken several steps. First, he'd asked his private investigator friend in Beijing to dig into the business records of his aunt's companies. What he found was eye-opening: a company called Lily Culture Media, incorporated with a $500,000 valuation, whose sole actual business was issuing fraudulent invoices. Over the past 2 years, it had issued nearly $1 million in fake consulting fees to his uncle's construction company. Second, he'd checked the bank records of old Cheng, James's driver. There was a large deposit, $60,000, from his aunt's personal account, made around the time James had drunkenly confessed to his father. Ethan had felt a chill run down his spine when he saw that. Did Aunt Lily already know? Or had she just suspected something and was trying to buy silence? Third, and most important, he'd gathered every piece of evidence relating to the imported medicine his aunt had marked up. The medicine had actually been purchased by one of her mahjong friends on a trip to India, for less than $200. She'd charged Ethan $2,800. He had the receipts, the bank statements, the chat logs. He'd never used any of it. He'd hoped he never would have to. But after that night at Hongfu restaurant, hearing his uncle's sigh in the empty banquet room, Ethan had made a decision. If his aunt made another move, he would show his cards. Not the secret about Marcus, that was a weapon he refused to use. He would show the evidence. The legal, admissible, court-ready evidence. For a week, nothing happened. No word from Aunt Lily. The family group chat stayed quiet. Ethan thought maybe Uncle James had talked her down. He'd underestimated her persistence. Friday night, Uncle Frank called. How, come by my place tomorrow. Your aunt wants to have a family meeting. Still about the old house? A pause. She's lawyered up. She's making it official. Ethan hung up and stood at the window of his rental apartment. It was a modest one-bedroom he'd been living in since returning home. Clean. Sparse. His father's photo sat on his desk, next to the key to the old house. He picked up the key. The cold metal bit into his palm. He rarely visited the house, it was too full of his father's presence. The books on the shelves he'd never finish reading. The dead plants on the balcony. The clothes folded neatly in the closet that nobody would ever wear again. He remembered his father's words, bear it if you can. But know where the line is, don't let anyone walk all over you. Tomorrow, he'd hold that line. But he wouldn't cross the one his father had drawn for him. He wouldn't destroy her with the secret about Marcus. He would destroy her case with the truth. Later that night, Uncle Sam called. His voice was laced with worry. How, go easy on her tomorrow. She's playing hardball, she says she's got lawyers ready to contest your father's will on grounds of mental incompetence. She's even found a nurse who worked with your dad, says she'll testify he wasn't in his right mind. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles whitening. Thanks for telling me, Uncle. After he hung up, he sat at his computer. He pulled up the records of his father's last months. His father had been too weak to manage on his own, so Ethan had hired a nurse, a middle-aged woman, Auntie Wang. She'd been kind, attentive, hardworking. Ethan had paid her faithfully every month, and she'd cried harder than anyone at his father's funeral. And now she was supposedly willing to testify that his father had been mentally incompetent? Something didn't add up. He found her number and dialed. It rang several times before she picked up, her voice heavy with sleep. Hello. Auntie Wang, it's me, Ethan. A pause. Then her voice changed, suddenly nervous. Oh, Ethan. It's so late, is everything okay? Auntie, I heard someone's asked you to testify that my father was out of his mind when he signed his will. Is that true? Silence. Then a sob. I'm so sorry, Ethan. Her voice broke. Your aunt came to see me last week. She gave me $2,000 and told me to say your father wasn't lucid. Just that, nothing else. I didn't want to, but she threatened me. She said if I didn't cooperate, she'd dig up an old medical mistake from 10 years ago and make sure I'd never work in this town again. Ethan's jaw tightened. Auntie, what kind of medical mistake? Just an 4 mix-up. Nobody got hurt. The hospital fined me and that was it, but if she goes public with it. Auntie, listen to me. His voice was steady. That mistake happened 10 years ago. It's already been settled. She can't use it against you. But I need you to do something for me. Anything, Ethan. Your father was so good to me. I could never have actually gone through with it. I haven't slept all week. I need you to record a statement. Just say what you told me, that she offered you money and threatened you to get you to lie. You don't have to testify in court. I just need the recording. Another pause. Then, I'll do it. I'll do it right now. Wait for me. Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. His aunt thought she'd found a weapon, but she'd handed him one instead. The next morning, a message came through from Auntie Wang. A short audio file. Her voice was shaky, but every word was clear. Ethan saved it to his encrypted folder. Next to the file name, he typed a single character, card. She'd played her hand. He'd just played a better one. The next afternoon, Ethan arrived at Uncle Frank's house on time. The living room was packed, his immediate family plus 2 distant uncles. A bigger crowd than the banquet. His aunt sat in the center of the couch, dressed in a crisp business suit like she was heading into a boardroom negotiation. In front of her, neatly arranged on the coffee table, was a stack of documents. Uncle James sat beside her, his head bowed almost to his chest. Marcus was conspicuously absent. How's here? She looked up at him, her eyes cold as steel. Sit. We have business to settle. Ethan took the armchair across from her. Uncle Frank and Uncle Sam exchanged a worried glance. As he sat down, Ethan noticed Uncle James's hands clasped on his knees, the knuckles white from tension. When Ethan entered, James had looked up briefly, and that look had carried everything, guilt, warning, and a strange kind of pleading. Then Aunt Lily began to speak. Before we start, let me lay out the situation, she said, picking up the top document. I've consulted 3 lawyers. They all agree, Grandpa was 86 and had mild dementia when he made his will. Its validity is questionable. As for my brother, he was on heavy painkillers during his final months. That's grounds to contest his will as well. She pushed a copy across the table. Ethan didn't look at it. What are you proposing? He asked. Both wills could be ruled invalid. Under intestate succession, Grandpa's house should be split equally among his 3 children. And your father's share would go to his spouse, children, and parents, so ultimately, the 3 siblings would split it anyway. Are you saying you want to go to court? If necessary. Her eyes never left him. But I'd rather not. Here's my offer, you renounce your claim voluntarily, and we'll compensate you. How much? She blinked, as if surprised he'd even ask. 10,000. The house is old and small. It's not worth more than 100,000 total. Divided 3 ways, that's about 33,000 each. 10,000 is a fair share. Ethan almost laughed. $10,000 for his father's last gift to him. And if I refuse? Her face hardened. Then we go to court. And I'll make sure the legal fees bleed you dry. On top of that, she paused, letting the tension build, there are some things I didn't want to bring up. But I will if I have to. She looked around the room, raising her voice. My brother's medical bills have some irregularities. I believe Ethan inflated the costs and defrauded the insurance company. If that comes out, it won't just be a family dispute. The room erupted. Uncle Frank shot to his feet. Lily. You can't say things like that without proof. She ignored him, staring at Ethan. Your father's final hospitalization included an $80,000 charge for imported medicine that wasn't covered by insurance. You claimed you paid it out of pocket. But I checked with the hospital pharmacy. That medicine was never on their list. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. That $80,000 had been his own money, spent on experimental drugs he'd had a friend ship from overseas. They hadn't saved his father, but he'd never regretted it. The medicine was sourced internationally, he said evenly. I have purchase records and customs documentation. If you want to see them, I can provide them. Internationally? Her laugh was sharp. That's smuggling, then. Much worse than fraud. When Aunt Lily said the word smuggling, Ethan caught Uncle James's reaction. His head snapped up, his lips moved. And Ethan read the word on his lips. Don't agree. Just 2 syllables. Aunt Lily couldn't see him. She had her back turned. Ethan gave an almost imperceptible nod. His uncle relaxed slightly, dropping his head again. Enough. James's voice cracked suddenly, hoarse and raw. Lily, that's enough. She spun on him. Shut up, James. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't concern me. He stood, pale as paper. I watched that boy grow up. I know what kind of person he is. He gave up his job, burned through his savings, and gave everything to care for his father. And now you're accusing him of fraud. Accusing? I'm stating facts. If he has nothing to hide, why be afraid of an investigation? The two faced each other across the room, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Uncle Sam tried to intervene. Both of you, sit down, let's talk this out. Nobody listened. Ethan watched the farce unfold. These were his family. Fighting over money. Tearing each other apart. And for what? A house that was barely worth $100,000. Slowly, he rose. Every eye in the room fixed on him. Aunt Lily. His voice was eerily calm. Are you done? She blinked. What? If you're done, I have something to say. He walked to the center of the room. But first, I want to ask you a question. He pulled out his phone and opened a folder. Do you know what this is? She stared at the screen. What are you showing me? This, Ethan said, is a complete record of every fake invoice your company, Lily Culture Media, has issued to Uncle James's construction company over the past 2 years. Nearly $1 million in fabricated, consulting fees. I have bank statements, contract copies, and email trails. Her face went pale. And this, he continued, swiping to the next screen, is the complete timeline of the imported medicine you charged me $2,800 for. Your mahjong friend bought it in India for $200. I have the receipts, the bank transfers, and the chat logs where you told her to keep quiet about the price. The room was dead silent. You told me you'd take care of everything when Dad was sick, Ethan said, his voice steady but cold. You promised me $50,000. It took 2 months to arrive, and it came from Uncle James's pocket, not yours. You took credit for it in the family group chat. I have screenshots of that too. Aunt Lily's mouth opened, but no words came out. And now you've hired a nurse to lie about my father's mental state. He pulled up the audio file. Would you like to hear her recording? Or should I save it for the judge? She lunged for his phone. Uncle James grabbed her arm. Lily. Stop. Let go of me. No. His voice was firm, almost broken. He has the evidence. You know he has it. We both know. Ethan looked at his aunt's face, the mask had fallen completely. Beneath it was not anger, not hatred, but something rawer. Fear. He put his phone away. I'm not going to use the recording about the nurse, he said quietly. Not yet. And I'm not going to expose everything I have. Not because I'm afraid of you, but because I want to give you one chance to walk away from this. She stared at him, uncomprehending. Drop the lawsuit, Ethan said. Drop the claims against the will. Acknowledge that the old house is mine, legally and without contest. In return, I won't file criminal charges for fraud, extortion, or witness tampering. I won't send you to prison. The room held its breath. Ethan, Uncle Frank said carefully, you're saying you could send her to jail, and you're not? I'm saying I have the evidence to do it, Ethan replied. I've had it for 6 months. But I held on to it. Because Dad's letter told me not to destroy her completely. He said she wasn't evil, just trapped in her own insecurities. So I'm giving her a way out. He turned back to his aunt. Take it. Or don't. But if you force me to court, I will file every piece of evidence I have. Not the secret I could have used, not the one that would tear this family apart in a way none of us could recover from. I'm not touching that. I'm only using what's legal, what's provable, and what's already in my lawyer's hands. And I will win. Aunt Lily's face had gone from pale to gray. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in 3 years, she had nothing to say. How can you do this to your own family, she whispered. Ethan looked at her, really looked. He saw a woman who had spent her entire life trying to prove she was worth something, who had clawed and schemed and manipulated because she'd never believed she was enough. He almost pitied her. I'm not doing anything to you, he said. I'm just refusing to let you do anything to me. That's the difference. The family meeting ended without a resolution. Aunt Lily left without signing anything, her face a mask of cold fury. But Ethan knew she was beaten, not because he'd humiliated her with a secret, but because he'd backed her into a corner with evidence she couldn't refute and a threat she couldn't fight. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. It was addressed to Ethan, handwritten on expensive stationery. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. How, I'm dropping the lawsuit. The house is yours. I won't contest it. Don't file the evidence. Please. That was all. Ethan read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it on his father's desk, next to the old key, next to the letter his father had left him. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel relieved. He felt something quieter, something heavier. He'd won, but winning hadn't felt like winning. It felt like the end of something that should have ended years ago. A month later, Ethan sold the old house. Not because he needed the money, but because he was finally ready to let go. With the proceeds, he bought a small courtyard on the edge of town. There was an old locust tree in the yard, and a patch of earth where he could plant vegetables. For the housewarming, he invited Uncle Frank and Uncle Sam's families. His aunt didn't come, but she sent a gift through Uncle Frank, a beautiful set of tea-ware. Your aunt remembered you love tea, Uncle Frank said. Ethan accepted it. He didn't say thank you. He didn't know if he meant it. At dinner, they all carefully avoided the sensitive subjects. They talked about work, about kids, about the weather. The atmosphere was a little stiff, but it was starting to feel like family again. Afterward, Ethan walked his guests to the door. Uncle Frank patted his shoulder. Come around more often, how? We're family. We should keep in touch. I will. He went back into the yard. Moonlight spilled across the flagstones. He brewed a cup of tea and sat under the locust tree. His phone buzzed, Marcus's report card. Top 5 in his class. Ethan smiled and typed, keep it up. The wind stirred the leaves. Ethan closed his eyes and let the silence settle around him. Family lines would continue. Secrets would pass down, or maybe they wouldn't. He had chosen not to use the one he knew, and that choice had changed something in him. He'd learned that winning didn't always mean destroying. Sometimes it meant pulling back, holding the line, and letting the other person walk away. But he also knew that trust, once broken, couldn't be mended. His aunt had apologized. He'd accepted it, not because he trusted her, but because he didn't want to carry hatred anymore. He would never share his life with her again, never let her into his decisions. He'd learned to protect himself, and that was enough. The sword he'd held over her head had never fallen. And in not swinging it, he'd cut his own chains. 3 years later, the Chengs gathered again for the memorial. More of them than usual, Lily had come. She had recovered, mostly. Still a little worn, but her eyes were clear again. Marcus had grown tall, still wearing his glasses, with an academic look about him. He'd just gotten his acceptance from Tsinghua. After the memorial, the family went to Ethan's courtyard for a meal. Marcus sat beside him, animatedly discussing college life. Marcus was still shy, but he'd developed a habit of quietly pushing dishes toward his mother, especially the shrimp. When Lily noticed, something flickered across her face, guilt, affection, a tentative kind of reaching out. She picked up a shrimp and put it in his bowl. "Eat more," she said softly. "You've gotten thin." Marcus smiled. "You too, Mom." Neither said more. But Ethan caught the redness in his aunt's eyes as she looked down. After the meal, Marcus helped with the dishes, moving quickly and purposefully. Uncle Frank watched him go and murmured to Ethan, "That kid grew up right. He's been through a lot, but it's made him strong." Ethan nodded. He knew what Marcus had been through, the confusion, the whispers, the questions he'd never dared to ask. And he knew that Marcus would never have to know the truth about his birth, because Ethan had chosen to keep that secret buried. Some secrets, he'd learned, weren't meant to be weapons. Some secrets were meant to protect the innocent. When Marcus got his Tsinghua acceptance, the first call he made was to Ethan. He was crying, but he didn't say, "I got in." He said, "Ethan, I did it." "Marcus." Ethan called him over. Marcus dried his hands and came. Ethan handed him an envelope. "What's this?" "Startup money." Ethan smiled. "The password's your birthday." Marcus opened it and saw the bank card inside. He pushed it back. "No, I've got a scholarship." "Take it." Ethan pressed it back into his hands. "It's not for spending. It's for emergencies. When you're in a new city alone, it's good to have something in your pocket." Marcus stared at the envelope for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "How am I ever going to repay you for this?" he asked, his voice rough. "Repay me?" Ethan laughed softly. "You're my little brother. That's what brothers do." Marcus tucked the envelope into his pocket and hugged him, quick and fierce. "Thank you." Ethan watched him walk away, his silhouette growing smaller under the streetlights. The wind rustled through the old locust tree. He went back inside and poured a fresh cup of tea. The tea was dragon well, his father's favorite. The moonlight shimmered on the surface of the cup. He lifted it to his lips. It was hot. But the aftertaste was sweet and long. Just like the past 3 years. Ethan sat under the locust tree, the courtyard silver with moonlight. He thought of the last line of his father's letter, how, "I'm sorry. I couldn't take care of you the way I should have." He used to read that and feel like a failure. But now he understood, his father hadn't written it because he doubted Ethan. He'd written it because he loved him too much. His father had known that after he was gone, Ethan would face everything alone. The scheming. The division. The coldness of people he thought were family. His father couldn't be there, so he left an apology. But he'd left other things too. The house, so Ethan would never be homeless. The words, "Bear it if you can, don't if you can't," giving him permission to fight back. The quiet instruction that Lily wasn't evil, just afraid, keeping Ethan from going too far. 3 years. He'd gone from a man who would always yield to someone who knew when to play his cards. From someone who clung to the illusion of family harmony to someone willing to lance the wound, without destroying the patient. From an orphan to a brother his cousin could lean on. This cup of tea, his father's favorite, he'd never understood why his father loved it. So bitter. So sharp. Now he did. You have to taste the bitter before you get the sweet. The tea cooled. Ethan set the cup down and went inside. Behind him, the moonlight still bathed the locust tree. Beyond, the city flickered and hummed. He closed the door, shutting out the night. He lay down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow there was so much to do: help Marcus get ready for college, deposit Uncle Frank's money, turn over the garden again. The road was long. But he wasn't in a rush anymore. He'd learned that justice didn't always mean blood. Sometimes it meant evidence. Sometimes it meant restraint. Sometimes it meant letting the law do what it was supposed to do, and letting himself walk away whole. The house was gone. The family was fractured. But he had his father's letter, his cousin's trust, and a cup of tea that tasted like the truth. And that was enough.